Plenty of countries discovered oil in the 20th century. Most squandered it on corruption, wasteful spending, or civil wars that left them poorer than before the drilling started. A handful built economies so dependent on oil that when prices crashed, entire nations collapsed. But one country did something almost unprecedented. It turned temporary resource wealth into permanent national security. Norway didn't just strike oil. It built the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, accumulated over $1.6 trillion, and created a financial fortress that makes it nearly immune to the economic chaos devastating other nations. And that difference explains why Norway might be the only country on Earth where discovering oil made democracy stronger instead of destroying it. Welcome to Finance History, where resource wealth, institutional design, and national survival intersect. And nothing works the way the textbooks claim it should. To understand how Norway avoided the resource curse that destroyed Venezuela, corrupted Saudi Arabia, and impoverished Nigeria, you have to forget the modern image of Scandinavian prosperity for a moment. No massive oil fund, no trillion-dollar reserves, no economic invincibility. In the early 20th century, Norway was poor, peripheral, and economically dependent on fishing, timber, and shipping. The country had recently gained independence from Sweden in 1905. It had no imperial history, no colonial extraction, no inherited wealth. Power didn't flow from resources. It flowed from relatively egalitarian institutions, strong civic participation, and a political culture that distrusted concentrated authority. The Norwegian state was one of many small European democracies, stable, yes, but hardly destined to become one of the world's wealthiest nations per capita. Their transformation began not with oil, but with institutional preparation. When oil was discovered in the North Sea in 1969, Norway had something most oil-rich nations lacked: a functioning democracy with transparent institutions, low corruption, and a population that expected accountability from its government. This is the first crucial difference most observers miss. In Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and Nigeria, oil preceded strong democratic institutions. Revenue flowed to whoever controlled the state, which created incentives to capture the state violently and hold it permanently. Politics became a zero-sum fight over resource rents. In Norway, democracy came first. When oil arrived, it entered a system that already had checks, balances, and public oversight. The government couldn't simply pocket the revenue. It had to justify how it was spent. And this is the second difference, and it's decisive. Norway didn't treat oil as income. It treated it as windfall. From the beginning, Norwegian policymakers understood something most governments refuse to accept. Oil is temporary. It will run out. Prices will fluctuate. Building a national budget around volatile commodity revenue is financial suicide. So they made a decision that seemed radical at the time and still seems radical now. They chose not to spend it. Instead of using oil revenue to fund current government operations, Norway created a sovereign wealth fund in 1990, originally called the Government Pension Fund, designed to save oil money for future generations. The logic was simple but uncommon. Oil belongs to the nation, not the current government. The wealth it generates should benefit Norwegians not yet born, not just those alive today. This required something most political systems can't sustain: long-term thinking enforced by law. The fund operates under strict rules. Only a small percentage of the fund's value, currently around 3%, can be withdrawn annually to support the national budget. The rest must be invested globally, not domestically, to avoid overheating the Norwegian economy and to ensure the wealth remains when the oil runs out. This is where Norway's approach diverges radically from every other oil state. In Saudi Arabia, oil revenue funds the current government, subsidizes the population, and maintains the ruling family. When prices fall, the state borrows or cuts spending. There's no permanent savings mechanism protecting future generations. In Venezuela, oil money was spent immediately on social programs, subsidies, and corruption. When prices crashed in 2014, the entire state collapsed because there was no reserve. Nigeria's oil wealth disappeared into corruption and mismanagement, leaving the population poorer despite sitting on massive reserves. Norway saved. The fund didn't just accumulate money. It professionalized investment. The Norwegian Central Bank manages the fund with mandates for ethical investing, diversification, and transparency. Every investment is publicly disclosed. The fund owns roughly 1.5% of every publicly traded company on Earth. It holds real estate in major cities. It invests in bonds, infrastructure, and renewable energy. And it never invests in Norway itself, preventing the Dutch disease where resource wealth inflates domestic costs and kills other industries. Compare that to oil-rich autocracies. Wealth concentrates in ruling families. Investments are opaque. Corruption siphons billions. The population sees little benefit. Political power depends on controlling resource revenue, which creates violent competition for the state. Norway decentralized the wealth. No single family controls it. No politician can redirect it. The fund is a national asset managed transparently under democratic oversight. This is the third difference, and perhaps the most uncomfortable one for other nations. Norwegians are taught to think of oil wealth as collective, temporary, and obligating responsibility to future generations. In most oil states, elites treat resource wealth as personal, permanent, and justifying current extraction. That's not a cultural quirk. It's an institutional outcome. Norway built systems that made looting the oil wealth nearly impossible. Other countries built systems where looting was the only rational strategy for those in power. This doesn't make Norwegians morally superior. It makes their institutions structurally different. And structure determines behavior far more than culture or rhetoric ever could. Here's the irony. Many economists in the 1970s assumed Norway would follow the same path as other oil states. Corruption would rise. Democracy would weaken. The economy would become dependent and fragile. But the opposite happened. Oil revenue strengthened Norwegian democracy because it was filtered through transparent institutions. Citizens could see where the money went. Politicians couldn't hide waste. Corruption remained low because oversight remained high. The system Norway built didn't stop at domestic policy. It couldn't. A $1.6 trillion fund doesn't sit idle. It shapes global markets. And that's exactly what happened next. By the 2000s, the Norwegian fund had become one of the largest institutional investors on Earth. It owned shares in Apple, Microsoft, Nestle, and thousands of other companies. It holds real estate in London, New York, Paris. It influences corporate governance through shareholder activism. When the fund votes, companies listen. This created something unprecedented. A small nation of 5 million people wielding financial influence typically reserved for superpowers. And because the fund operates transparently with ethical guidelines, it became a model. Other sovereign funds study Norway. Pension managers benchmark against it. Economists analyze its strategy. Norway didn't just get rich from oil. It built financial credibility that money alone can't buy. This is where the contrast with other oil states becomes starkest. Saudi Arabia's wealth buys military hardware and political alliances, but it doesn't buy institutional trust. Russia's oil wealth funds geopolitical ambitions, but collapses when prices fall. Norway's wealth is invested globally, professionally managed, and generates returns independent of oil prices. That makes it resilient. When oil crashed in 2014, Venezuela imploded. Russia's economy contracted. Saudi Arabia borrowed. Norway's fund lost value temporarily, but recovered because it was diversified. The fund's existence meant Norway wasn't dependent on current oil prices. It had already saved decades of revenue. This is the structural advantage most oil states will never achieve. They spent yesterday's oil money on today's budget. Norway saved it for tomorrow's security. And tomorrow always comes. Here's where the story becomes a warning for everyone else. The Norwegian model only worked because it was implemented before oil wealth created vested interests in wasting it. By the time the money started flowing, the rules were already in place. Citizens expected transparency. Politicians faced oversight. Corruption was already low. Try implementing the Norwegian model in a country where elites are already stealing oil revenue and you'll face violent resistance. The people benefiting from the current system won't voluntarily create a transparent fund that cuts them off. This is why the Norwegian success story is simultaneously inspiring and depressing. It proves resource wealth doesn't have to cause corruption. But it also proves that escaping the resource curse requires having functional institutions before the oil arrives. For most oil-rich nations, that ship sailed decades ago. Their elites are already entrenched. Their institutions are already captured. Reforming the system would require overthrowing it. And those in power won't allow that. This brings us to the present and why this story still matters. Norway's fund now exceeds $1.6 trillion. That's roughly $300,000 per Norwegian citizen. The fund generates returns that support the national budget fund pensions, and provide a cushion against any economic shock. Norway can afford policies other nations can't. It can maintain generous welfare systems, invest in green energy, and weather recessions without austerity. Not because Norwegians work harder or are smarter, because 50 years ago, their government made decisions that compounded into structural advantage. Meanwhile, other oil-rich nations face the opposite trajectory. Venezuela's oil wealth is gone. The country is in collapse. Nigeria's population grows while oil revenue stagnates, creating a demographic time bomb. Russia's economy remains fragile and dependent on commodities it can't control. Saudi Arabia is trying to diversify, but faces the same problem. Decades of oil dependency created an economy and society structured around free money. Changing that requires pain current elites won't accept. What often goes unspoken is how much Norway's position insulates it from the chaos others face. When energy prices spike, most nations suffer. Norway benefits twice, from higher oil revenue and from fund returns on energy investments. When inflation strikes, wage earners see purchasing power erode. Norway's fund value adjusts, protecting national wealth even as individuals struggle. When global markets crash, most countries face fiscal crisis. Norway's reserves cushion the blow. That's not because Norway is immune to reality. It's because Norway positioned itself upstream from most economic shocks 50 years ago. This is the core lesson of the Norwegian fund and of the resource curse more broadly. Natural resource wealth is a test of institutional quality. Good institutions turn oil into permanent prosperity. Bad institutions turn oil into corruption, conflict, and collapse. Norway passed the test. Most others failed, and failure compounds. Once oil money creates powerful interests in corruption, reform becomes nearly impossible. The elites who benefit from stealing resource revenue will kill to keep it. Literally. This reveals something broader about the world we live in. The nations that thrive with resource wealth aren't the luckiest or the most resource-rich. They're the ones who built institutions before the money arrived. Saudi Arabia has more oil than Norway. It's poorer per capita. Venezuela has massive reserves. It's an economic collapse. Nigeria is one of the world's largest oil exporters. Most Nigerians live in poverty. Norway has less oil than all of them. But Norway saved, diversified, and invested transparently. 50 years later, the difference is a $1.6 trillion gap between resource curse and resource blessing. The uncomfortable truth is this. Most oil-rich nations won't follow Norway's model. Not because it doesn't work, but because their elites benefit from the current dysfunctional system. Corruption is a feature, not a bug. Theft is rational when institutions don't punish it. And reforming the system threatens the people currently in power. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand it, it'll crush you all the same. The Norwegian Oil Fund shows us that natural resources are neither curse nor blessing. They're a mirror. They reveal whether your institutions are strong enough to handle sudden wealth. Most aren't. And the price of that failure is generational poverty despite sitting on oceans of oil. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and I'll show you where to look.